This way, right?
Oh, there you are. I can see you in the corner. Terrific.
Matt, what'd you do different? Do you have different glasses on?
I wear these glasses that are supposed to protect your eyes from the blue computer. You know?
You look dapper.
I'm doing what I can to seem intelligent.
Yes, I meant intelligent. A dapper intelligent.
Right. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. It's so nice to see everybody.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi. Hi.
Amy is sitting across from us at the restaurant. You can see, you probably recognize our surroundings here.
Yeah.
I was at my first ever wine Zoom conversation earlier this afternoon, like apart from anything that Chris and I have done in the last week and a half. And I was struck by a bunch of things. You know, there were about a dozen people there. But one of the things was that the fellow, a friend of ours who was moderating it, made mention of the idea that sometimes it's a good idea with these meetings to wait a few minutes and sort of let everybody show up, you know.
Okay.
And then we were talking a moment ago about the advisability of like telling a warm-up joke to the audience. Unfortunately, which I'm sorry to disappoint, but I do not have that warm-up joke because that it came up a little late in the process. So
You want a joke, Matt? I've got one.
you want to tell a joke?
Yeah. I told it to the grandkids. They thought it was funny.
Go ahead, we're ready.
Why don't gorillas like to play cards in the jungle?
Gorillas and cards in the jungle, I do not know.
There's too many cheetahs.
Nice.
The grandkids enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And one of our grandsons does cheat at Candyland, so of course he was the cheetah. So that's my little joke for the day.
Wonderful, thank you.
Welcome.
I think at 6:04, it makes sense. Oh, hold on, I gotta admit some more people. Okay, admitting.
There are a lot of people.
Nobody knows.
Okay, now I think we're all present.
What we need to do though is,
Great. Well, now, Harvey, how come I can't? How come people get it?
Yeah.
I definitely see how many more people.
Yeah.
Great.
Can I tell a joke?
Sorry to
Wow. That's sophisticated.
Okay, thank you so very much, all of you, for joining us. This is our first official. We had a little bit of a pilot not too long ago, a week ago or so, and got to just run through this briefly. The way up there are a few more people here than there were at our last conversation. So I think that the way that we'll handle it tonight is we'll go through these wines. Chris and I will go through the wines. I can't tell you, I can't remember the last time that I was more looking forward to tasting a wine. We made a decision to work with these wines a week ago. And obviously, in order to prepare for this, I'm sure that this has been the same for Christopher. We have had these wines on our minds, you know, and I'm very, very excited now to taste them. We're going to run with stuff that we feel an investment in, you know. So these are two wines that we go back with a little ways for a couple different reasons. Two wines that you guys, everybody has these wines, or I imagine everybody has these wines in front of them. This is 2018 Domaine Rollin Bourgogne au Cote-de-Beaune Blanc. And this is 2016 Emmerich Folliot Le Matheny Poulsard. When I was thinking about the kind of the first way that first things that I might say about these wines, one of the things that occurred to me, one of the things I was thinking about was how similar they are to each other, or how in some way proximate they are to each other, or conversely, how incredibly sort of disparate they are from one another. I was thinking about ways that they have some things in common and ways that they have absolutely nothing in common. What they have in common, basically, I think, and I was just Googling this this afternoon, it's about an hour, I think Google said an hour and 5 minutes, door to door, from Matheny, which is just outside of Arbois, down the hill to Burgundy, and to the front door of Domaine Rollin and Pernon-Vergelès, just about exactly 1 hour. Which obviously, I mean, it's an hour, you know, from San Francisco to Calistoga or something. So it's not, right, it's not a huge chunk of space that we're talking about. On the other hand, the geographic and topographical and cultural differences that are covered over the course of that hour are sort of massive, right? On the one hand, you have Burgundy kind of in an area that is relatively flat compared to what you encounter as you head east and up the hill into Switzerland. And the Jura is this region that is kind of situated on that trip, you know, up the hill and eventually over the hill and down into Geneva. That's where the Jura is, right over the hill from Geneva. As such, it's not that surprising to hear because of the difference, cultural differences, geographic differences, topographical differences between the two places. Stylistically, these two wines are kind of completely night and day. Rollin, to my taste, is about as rigorous and precise and proper as a Burgundy gets, or maybe wine from anywhere for that matter gets. It is kind of straight, you know, it's like a laser beam. And Emmerich Matheny, who we'll probably end up telling a story about before this is over, we visited with him a little more than a year ago. And Emmerich is completely rough around the edges. And it sort of reminds me, like, as I'm thinking about him now, he kind of reminds me like of a bear a little bit. I mean, he's kind of a, you know, he's an incredibly kind-hearted, soft guy, but he's a rustic guy, right? And the wines that he makes in the Jura, in this kind of semi-mountainous area, are really rustic. They, you know, they're mountain wines and they're a little rough around the edges. They're full of energy. Sometimes they have a little variation to them. Anyway, that is the long and the short of it. Obviously, there's lots more to say. Well, I've monopolized, Chris, and I'm going to pour this wine for you. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Finally,
Yeah.
at long last.
Hopefully you guys are not wasting any time to putting this into your glass.
Everybody's got it working.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Good to see you. No.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Cheers, guys.
To you guys, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for hosting us.
So, wow. It's also, I think I mentioned this in an email, it is our first experience with 18 Burgundy. We've had a little bit of 18 Beaujolais, which technically is Burgundy, but from the part of Burgundy called the Côte-d'Or, which is kind of Burgundy proper, this is our first experience with it. Said already to be a really great vintage. So exciting.
Yeah, the reputation of this vintage is a fairly even and long growing season, and that goes a long ways to, you know, keep a wine that is looking to kind of maintain freshness and you know, balance. Yeah, it comes through. I think that's a very clean example.
Something that I read about this particular wine, the Cote-de-Beaune is an outlying region. So the Rollin family is based in this little village called Pernon-Vergelès. And Pernon-Vergelès is just off to the west of what is called the Hill of Corton. The Hill of Corton has a very famous vineyard on it called Corton Charlemagne, which is a Grand Cru vineyard, and it wraps around this hill. And then just into the valley floor, little village Pernon-Vergelès, and that's where the Rollin family lives and makes their wine. Then when you move further west of Pernon-Vergelès into kind of these little rolling hills, you encounter more Pinot Noir and Chardonnay vineyards that are not quite the hallowed terroir of that area around Pernon-Vergelès and the Hill of Corton. So what happens a lot in Burgundy is that a domain will have its main holdings in one of these very famous appellations. Pernon-Vergelès is not that famous, but for instance, in Meursault or in Pouilly-de-Montrachet, and then they also make some wine from the area that is slightly outlying to that very kind of famous and expensive terroir, you know? So this is the example of that wine. Although from the density and complexity in this wine, it's hard to imagine what like 3 or 4 steps up as far as concentration and complexity could be from a wine like this. It is already obviously quite stuffed, and you know, I don't think there's anything missing from this one. I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, totally.
I don't-
I think it's worth pointing out too that, you know, going and shopping for an Cote-de-Beaune Blanc is probably not the best approach to take when shopping for white Burgundy. We're bringing you a very solid and reputable example. Maybe one
the
of
best.
the finer ones
Maybe the
that
best.
you're going to find. This is coming from single vineyards that are blended together. But yeah.
The other thing that I was going to say for any of you who are oenological viticultural geeks out there, I read about this wine that one of the things about the Cote-de-Beaune, and this would make sense owed to the fact that it is considered like slightly lesser terroir than a place like Courton-Charlemagne. One of the things that makes the Cote-de-Beaune that way is that it does not see very much late afternoon sun, right? So because of the position of the hills, the sun is headed west, and because of the positioning of the hills, the fruit does not see all kinds of afternoon heat. And what I read, I think this was on the Rosenthal website, the importer of this wine, is that the yields are kept very, very slim in that vineyard so as to make sure all of the grapes are sufficiently concentrated, and I would say robustly concentrated in this case. I want to say, while I have everybody here, you can please feel free at the moment to type out any questions. There's this chat bar on the I think on all of the rights of your screens. Please don't hesitate to hit us up with some questions.
Matt, this is a technical question, not a wine question, but some friends are trying to join. Are you able to let more folks in?
I think everybody's in.
Sorry.
Oh, there you go. Okay,
All right, great.
never mind.
All right. No trouble at all. Administrative questions. Okay, great.
Is there like a 20-second on which wine we're drinking right now since we missed it?
We're drinking the white wine.
Great, we can do that.
Here is a good question. If we don't have a wine fridge, how should we chill the wines? How long to put them in the fridge, perhaps?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, actually, we've been on the subject of this one. Did you pull the wine out of the fridge? Did you wine out of the fridge, Chris?
Yes.
And this wine in particular is a good candidate to talk about this because it shouldn't be much cooler than, I don't know, a cellar temperature, 65 degrees, 67. It shouldn't be chilled.
I think everything should be cellar temperature. I want to drink every bottle of wine for the rest of my life at cellar temperature. It needn't be any cooler or warmer than that. And to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what that whole debate is about. Yeah. Yeah. I don't see how I can let anybody back
Sorry,
in.
that was still me. We're back.
Okay,
I
well said.
apologize for being the drama queen.
Yeah, I
But we're
think that
excited to be here.
for simplicity's sake, 6 o'clock on a Saturday, you could have the wine at about the same temperature as San Francisco's current temperature.
Yeah.
And be assured that it's probably, San
Francisco cellar temperature. Okay. Question. Oh, well, what type of glass should we be using with these two different wines? Yes, Robert can. Well, absolutely you can, for sure. Especially if you go, I'm Elizabeth Schaefer, I would get back to your question, but I want to say I went camping a few years ago and had to bottle of wine in the which was that was the best place ever for me, a chilled bottle of wine. It was perfect though. It was exactly the right temperature. What type of glass should we be using with these two different wines? Well, Ames, will you grab a Burgundy glass? We work at the restaurant with these two different kinds of glasses. This sometimes we call a Bordeaux glass, which maybe some people would think is strange that we're drinking Burgundy out of a Bordeaux glass, but really the Burgundy glass, which is the big bowl, is kind of thought to have been designed. Thank you. Thought to have been designed for Pinot Noir. Designed around the aromatics of Pinot Noir. So if you guys have these glasses at home and you want to bust them out for, when you start pouring yourself the Poulsard, then I think you should absolutely do that. It is going to taste, that wine is going to taste like 1,000 times better in this glass than it will in this glass. No, I'm just kidding. It won't. It absolutely won't. But this is a Burgundy glass. So
For marketing
there it is.
purposes, I think it's important to demonstrate the importance of drinking Tempranillo in a Tempranillo glass. But for the, fundamentally, it's going to be perceived the same way. I would say whatever is going to give anybody the confidence to open that bottle of wine.
Schofield, yeah.
Hey, Matt, it's a business idea. You can start selling glasses.
Oh yeah. So
Chris suggested before we started, and we'll go through this fairly quickly, I think, but in anticipation of the Poulsard, Chris is going to give a word or two about getting through this wax capsule, which I suggested. All of you, of course, have already gotten through the wax capsule. So, and some of you are shaking your heads at me like, why didn't we know any of this before? But demonstration by Mr. George.
I mean, you're going to make a mess no matter how you do this. Hopefully, the wine is worth the effort and the mess that you make. But we go in straight through the wax, and a lot of the wax capsules that you find in kind of more less traditionally made wines, you find them often domestic wines that throw the wax on there, and they throw it on very thick, and it's sometimes not so soft and not so easy to get through. And obviously you have to be careful to, that you're not going to let the corkscrew slide right over your knuckle or into your hand. But, in this case, it's very easy. You just put it right through the wax. And yeah, pretty simple.
Look at that. First try. That's the first bottle of wine he's ever opened. Chris wanted me to repeat a line that I said last time when we transitioned from one wine into the next. Sometimes we say at the restaurant to stragglers who are sitting in the restaurant at 11 or 11:30, we say, or this is a famous bartender line, I think. They say, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. You know that line? Yeah. So what I said last week was, you don't have to drink all the wine that's in your glass, but if you want to join us, you got to pour this now. One of the obviously the first things that we notice about this wine, about this Poulsard, is this very striking color that people maybe would refer to the first. I mean, there's a brickishness obviously to it, but brickishness is a word that's often used for Nebbiolo, and the brickishness of Nebbiolo is a shade or two sort of more brown than this. So I would maybe even refer to this more like strawberry or.
Yeah, absolutely. I get strawberry on Poulsard plenty.
Color or smell or?
Yeah, the smell of it, the color of it. It's a light skinned grape, so it doesn't lend a lot of pigment to the wine.
What a nose that is! Yeah. My goodness. Do you know that you're not in Burgundy anymore when you smell that and you feel like you're in the middle of a field or a barn or something? It smells like a barn almost, doesn't it? I mean, I don't mean to be pejorative, but it's wow. So this is one of the things of these wines that I think is very striking for me. Is you look at the wine, it almost looks like rosé. It's it's pretty translucent, and then you smell it, and it has this like feral nose. And you kind of look at the wine, you're like, did you just make that smell? Oh man, this is I think this is very compelling.
We were introduced to this grower's wines about a year and a half ago. I mean, this was just months before we took the trip and eventually met them, visited the domain. But they immediately impressed us.
We're 2 for 2 here today.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
So the quick story that I was promising before about Emmerich Folliot is Amy and Chris and I were in Europe together a year ago. And we started the day in the Valle d'Aosta. We woke up in the very, very northern part of Italy just before Switzerland. We got up, we had breakfast, and then we drove up and had lunch in Lausanne in Switzerland, right near the lake. And then we got back in our car and we carried on. We drank a little bit. This is, it's important. You'll understand why in a minute. We drank a little. We each had a beer or two at lunch. And then we drove up to the Jura and we went to our I think like 4 o'clock in the afternoon tasting at Domaine Matheny with Emmerich Folliot, who lives, his winery is like a bunch of kind of different cellars under his home. So he's got these various rooms that are all subterranean under his home in the middle of this like big field. And we proceeded with the tasting. He was very kind. He poured some dry wines for us. And then following the tasting of the dry white wines and some Poulsard, I'm sure we tasted that day.
Oh yeah.
Then we went into what maybe would be called the Mark cellar. And the Mark cellar is where he had his Macvan, which is wine that's been fortified with a little bit of brandy. And then he had actual kind of brandy. What else did he have in there?
I mean, I likened it to going off a ski jump. I've never been off a ski jump, but it felt like that because we were tasting. I mean, as is pretty traditional in this region, a lot of these producers make like 12 different wines.
And they make little barrels of liqueurs that they stash away in the cellar that they just go draw into. This guy doesn't even, I don't think, sell any of this stuff. He's just got a collection of barrels working, downstairs. In any case, it's now 5:30 or 5:45 or something. I would think I will speak for all three of us after a long day of driving and beer at lunch and going through tasting all the dry wines and then having a little brandy tasting to finish it off at 5:30, 6 o'clock. We were tired. And he said, "Where are you going for dinner tonight?" And we said, "Oh, we're really interested in getting really classical fondue." And we were going to go to this kind of classical old restaurant in downtown Arbois. And he said, we said, "How is the fondue at that place?" And Emmerich said, "It's okay, but my fondue is a lot better. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to call a couple of my friends. And why don't you come back at 8 o'clock and I'll make some fondue for you guys." And we got back to the house at 8 o'clock after, I remember taking like a half an hour nap or something, and we got back to the house at 8 o'clock. And I remember there was a magnum of Poulsard sitting in the middle of the table and vast platters of charcuterie and bread. And Emmerich is at the stove with 3 different kinds of Comté cheese. He's got like the 1 year, the 3 year, and the 5 year Comté cheese, and he's making fondue, And we just had it was maybe the most fun that we had on the whole trip. It was unbelievable. Meanwhile, these guys didn't even speak English. Emmerich and his 2 friends hardly speak a word of English.
Well, they originally offered, Emmerich said, "Hey, look, I'm going to bring my buddy, I'm going to invite him. He speaks English, so he's going to be able to help us communicate."
Yeah.
I mean, that much we were able to understand because he's speaking French and we're just hazarding at what
it was all piecemeal, and after all the wine, it got easier.
But he didn't show up. The English speaker did not show up. So
that's right. Christoph,
yeah.
Janine has a question.
Yeah.
I can't identify the flavors that well. Can you go into depth about flavors in this?
I mean, I will hold to some of why I really appreciate people that come to wines like this for the first time is that they themselves can identify very honestly what they believe they're tasting. And, we're grasping at like fruits and, vegetables sometimes when we're tasting wines. I have this idea that Poulsard, because it showcases strawberry, I've understood this to be the case. And that's what I'm getting on this, like a really kind of a riper strawberry fruit, red and deep. I mean, it's not like fresh, zippy and light. It's like maybe strawberry that you left in your car and you open your car up and you're like, "Oh my God, I left the fruit in here." On a sunny day for sure.
Yeah. There are a couple of questions here. I want to backtrack and go into these questions just for a minute. What is Poulsard? That is a great question. Poulsard is a grape variety. So just like Cabernet Sauvignon is a grape variety, or Pinot Noir is a grape variety, or Syrah, or it's just exactly the same as that. It's another kind of a grape variety. As Chris mentioned earlier, it is a thin skin grape variety, which is one of the reasons that very often when you see Poulsard, it is kind of wispy. It doesn't that much. One of the that I'm doing at La Matheny is that the wines are not the least bit wispy. I think that is somewhat attributable to the 8 years that he spent. I mentioned this in an email studying with Jacques Pouffinet. Jacques Pouffinet was Folliot's mentor for 8 years. Pouffinet legendarily made red wines that were not shrinking violets. Very structured, kind of well-built red wines, which is not, as I said, not the way the region always goes, right? Sometimes the red wines in the Jura are shrinking violets, are kind of, wispy and thin and a little attenuated. And this is obviously cut from a different cloth. Someone asked a great question. I think it was Bill, about effervescence. You want to speak about effervescence?
Oh, yeah.
And about VA?
Yeah. I mean, effervescence sometimes you find in these wines. The other thing that you find common in wines, especially from this house, is volatile acidity as well. And I think that, oftentimes it's the way that the wine is made, and sometimes it's made in a slightly loose way where there is a little bit of CO2 that winds up in the bottling. And, the purists that are only drinking Burgundy might consider it a fault. Certainly, there are a lot of people that would consider that, like, slight spritz that you find, like maybe not kosher.
I think, like everything else, when things are in proportion, it's all good. So could I imagine this having a level of VA that contributes a little bit of a spritz to the wine that is a little like bordering on offensive or not that delicious? I can absolutely imagine that. We have tasted, we taste some of those wines, there's this whole natural wine thing that's out there, and wines now come in every shape and size. This wine, alternatively, seems to me like a classically made wine that has just a tiny bit of that kind of mild VA on the front that contributes really what is a little bit of a kick to this flavor profile. It's almost like it's like an electric charge.
I mean, volatile acidity in my book every time is complimentary when there's a bit of it there.
That's mild.
Yeah, for sure. It's a product of a long fermentation oftentimes. A slight mingling with oxygen while fermentation is happening, and it's pretty common in Nebbiolo-based wines. In fact, I think that it's acetic acid. It's a slight movement towards vinegar that when it's in my opinion, when it's brought into a wine, it adds another layer. And it adds further dimension. It's present here for sure.
So with the VA, what foods would pair well with this? What foods would pair well with this is a great question. I alluded to this I think in the email that I sent yesterday. The classic foods of the region. What are the classic foods of the region of the Jura? The most famous classic food of the region is Comté cheese, right? So it's Alpine cheese. So Comté or Gruyere. As richly, the more richly flavored, the better. Behind Comté cheese, second to that, is this very, very famous dish that is served all over Arbois. There are, the same way there are in the United States, there are 99s. I don't know if there are any 99s on the West Coast. There are different places that advertise, a bacon double cheeseburger. Well, those same signs on the streets in Arbois advertise coq au vin jaune. Right, and coq au vin jaune, as you can maybe imagine, is coq au vin made with, instead of red wine, which is what coq au vin is usually made with, made braising chicken in the quintessential wine of the region, which is called Arbois vin jaune, a very, very deeply structured, kind of nutty, very rich white wine. They braise the chicken in that, and then they serve that coq au vin jaune over white rice with a lot of morel mushrooms. That is some people. Alex, do you want to say something? You're highlighted for a second. Okay, great. So anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Hold on.
Alex?
Hold on. I was going to say it basically saves chicken.
It
makes the chicken.
Well, there's all kinds
chicken.
There's all kinds of different chicken in this world.
Yeah.
And when you're eating it after it's been braised in vin jaune with morel mushrooms, then you exalt the chicken.
Awesome.
It tastes pretty good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so those are the classic Comté cheese, coq au vin jaune, but cream sauces, morel mushrooms, certainly charcuterie, richer mountain foods. Whatever you imagine that you find in an alpine lodge. What's that potato dish that we? It's moving in the direction of raclette and reblochon and I think tartiflette. Tartiflette is roasted potatoes and that's the kind of stuff they eat up there: potatoes and cheese and cream and pork, right? And this, you can imagine, this is obviously not this is not the darkest wine in the world. This is but it has lots of acidity, right? And it's going to cut through some of the richness of all of that cuisine, right? This is a glass. If you had a plate of charcuterie and reblochon and roasted potatoes and chicken and mushrooms and cream sauce, you might want like a white wine that has some depth of flavor and plenty of complexity, but also phenomenal cut for all the fat and all that food, you know? Makes sense? There was one other question. We have a nice spread of Comté. Wow, that's fantastic. Everybody's at raclette. What was the last question I was going to ask?
Oh, well,
What red wine varieties can you chill is, we were talking earlier about cellar temperature, and I think the idea that people should chill red wines a little bit. You don't want to drink red wine room temperature even. Everything should be chilled a tiny bit. What I was going to say is I mentioned in this video that I made, this wine basics video that is on I think it's on the brand new SaturdayWine.com website. There's this video that I made of, it's like 50 minutes of the basics of wine. And one of the things that I say in that video, is that we run this exercise at the restaurant. We blind taste a bottle of wine sometimes at the end of the night. We pull a cork on something. And then, especially when we have junior staff around, we say, on a scale of 1 to 10, where is the ripeness on this wine? And on a scale of 1 to 10, where are the tannins? And on a scale of 1 to 10, where is the acidity? Ripeness, tannins, and acidity. And someone asked, how does this wine stack up in terms of ripeness, tannins, and acidity? Which I think is a great question.
yeah, I saw that question earlier.
Yeah,
and
it's a good one.
I think we should.
Let's
I
do
think
it.
We should get to it.
Okay,
for
let's
sure.
do it. This will be our last thing. We'll do this, and then we'll say a word about next week's wines, and then we will let you march off into the grandeur of the rest of your Saturday evenings with these wines in front of you.
I pasted the earlier question into the chat for you, Matt.
What you pasted, which earlier question is that?
The one about the tannins, the acidity, and the others.
So much. Richness, acidity, and tannins. Chris George, where is this on a 1 to 10 ripeness scale?
I mean, it's a ripe red fruited wine for sure. Absolutely.
I mean, here's the thing that we have to say about 2016 as a vintage in France, or especially for red wines. I mean, anything that you can find from that vintage that is still in the market, from Bordeaux or Burgundy or the Jura or the Rhone, these are very, very magnificent wines. And that's one of the reasons, like, we're not super surprised that this is as good as it is, because it's 16. And great winemakers made really great wine in 2016.
Yeah, part of it was the difficulty of the vintage too. I mean, there was so much that really beset a lot of the people that were trying to grow fruit. You name it, whether it be like hail or like pestilence. I mean, a lot of people lost a lot of their fruit, and the fruit that was saved was, riper, better for it. It
was cherry fruit, the fruit that was saved. Yeah.
I mean, it gets back to my comment about, shopping for Cote-de-Beaune Blanc, like investing in the grower who is able to know what to do when they're dealt such a poor hand. It's like a bad vintage of 2016. A lot of the wines that are made from talented winemakers are showcasing like extra character.
Absolutely. We very often say that sometimes the quote unquote lesser vintages, which this is not a lesser vintage, but sometimes if you have a vintage that is characterized by kind of wonky fruit or high acid fruit, or sometimes we feel like those are the vintages that deliver the most character.
I say lesser only because, a lot of the wine critics. Yeah.
Totally.
I mean, if you were to, open up a magazine or, get online and search vintages out, immediately, what you'd find is universally the journalists that are grading wines on a scale of, 80 to 100 are not necessarily, they would look down on a vintage beset by disease. But yeah, this is a wine of super character. I think that it's ripe. I think the acidity is great. I think the tannins, I mean, they're not, I've gone on record recently talking about how Poulsard doesn't necessarily introduce much tannin. There is tannin in this.
There's definitely tannin.
Yeah.
Although, so on the ripeness scale, to answer the question, I'm going to say we are somewhere in like 7, 8.
Yeah.
Full ripe, not overripe, but not anything missing. On tannins, on account of the fact that this is Poulsard, and Poulsard does not have an abundance of natural tannin, we're probably more 5, 6,
Say
5,
like
4.
4, maybe. Yeah, 4.
So we're right in the middle somewhere, 4,
Yeah,
5.
Yeah.
And then acidity, it's an 8 or 9, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah, for sure. Great
it's
acidity. Yeah.
it's right up there in terms of acidity.
Oftentimes what you find from this region too, I'll just add this
Yeah.
as a quick note.
Please.
Oftentimes you have a lot of producers that will blend Pinot with Poulsard with Trousseau. Those are the 3 red grapes that are super important. And, you know, Trousseau makes such compelling wine too. But they all introduce like a little something different. The Poulsard oftentimes brings fruit. The Pinot, especially in that region, brings great acidity. The Trousseau, which, you know, there's a lot of complexity with each and every grape, but Trousseau brings tannin. And so you find a lot of great wines made with the 3 co-fermented. And yeah, I mean, they're wines of character. This is definitely Emmerich's wines. I've never had one of them that hasn't, you know, been kind of a bundle of fun.
So I think, France, generic question, where are the best wines made in the world? I can't,
You don't want to answer that
we
one?
tend to favor the old, we have soft spots for France and Italy, you know, there's our, wait. And speaking of France and Italy, these are the wines for next week. This is 2018 Puy-Fumé from a top grower named Marc Deschamps. Puy-Fumé, some of you may know, is Sauvignon Blanc. 2018 we just tasted a 2018 Chardonnay from Burgundy, from that Cote-de-Beaune Blanc. This is 2018 Puy-Fumé, which is would be quite distinct because it's not Chardonnay, it's Sauvignon Blanc. Deschamps is known for making kind of textbook lean. Puy-Fumé, generally speaking, is a kind of is a zone for generally quite precise Sauvignon Blanc. I'm gonna get to questions here one sec. Then from very far away from the Loire Valley, all the way in the very, very northwesternmost part of Italy, this is Grosjean Fumine. Fumine is another sort of grape variety. We'll be on our 2nd consecutive week next week of an obscure, slightly esoteric grape variety. Fumine is nothing like Poulsard. It's one of actually the most important red grapes of the Valle d'Aosta. Grosjean is maybe the most important grower in the Valle d'Aosta. This wine, this Grosjean Fumine, is 2013, which has both of us, I think, a little bit giddy because the immediately adjacent region to the Valle d'Aosta, which is Piedmont, we have been through the 2013s in Piedmont now for a couple of years, and they are, it's another example of a very fine vintage. So we have high expectations for that Grosjean.
There was one quick question.
Yeah.
We talked about food pairings with this last wine,
Yeah.
Poulsard from Matheny, but we didn't really touch on what you would like to have with
What we would eat with the Cote-de-Beaune Blanc. Well, I will tell you that right before I was rushing to get to the restaurant at about 5 o'clock, and I had these little baby Yukon Gold creamer potatoes, and I tossed them in a bowl with some olive oil and salt, and I roasted them, and they were ready just before I left, and I grabbed them out of the oven, and I put them in a little casserole dish, and I had some pulled roasted chicken that I kind of pulled a little bit more and tossed with the roasted potatoes. And I have 3 spears of asparagus that I poached a couple of days ago. And I had a little block of Comté cheese. And we have some Pink Lady apples here at the restaurant. And the chicken and the potatoes are now in the casserole dish. And we are, as soon as we're done here, we will grate some of the Comté cheese and sprinkle it over the casserole, and then melt the Comté cheese onto the potatoes and the chicken and the broiler. And then we will finely chop some Pink Lady apple and some of that asparagus and toss it on the top of the casserole with the chicken, the potatoes, and the Comté de Beaune Blanc. Roasted chicken, roasted potatoes, a little Comté cheese, maybe a little apple. You probably got that little apple note in that Cote de Beaune Blanc. You know I ain't lying. That apple was there. So anyway, That is what we're gonna eat. And you're all welcome to come by. I got a giant hotel pan full of chicken potato Comté casserole. No, you can't be. I don't have enough. It's just for us. I'm sorry. Next time when we reopen and there's no more sheltering in place, we'll do it next time. We have a dining room and everything, kitchen. It's all here.
I mean, I think
The question. How long will the Poulsard last ever it's been open? I would say you put a cork in it and there's a half a bottle and you put it in the fridge. It's good for the week.
a couple days at the very least.
At least a few
Yeah,
days.
Yeah.
This is not a wine
The
that
cellar.
this is not a wine for 10 years of cellaring.
No.
This is a wine to drink now and for the next few years,
Yeah,
I would
it's been-
think.
absolutely.
No, now.
Now, right now.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
right this
Yeah, me, right now.
If it survives tonight, I'd be surprised.
Right now, Matt.
Thank you, Linda.
Right
Thank-
now.
Thank you.
Hey,
I appreciate it.
Matt, can you bring the laptop or the iPad or whatever it is just into the kitchen, and those of us who want to keep following along can just stick with you for a bit? That sounds pretty good.
Well, it's all done already. It's just going to slide right into the broiler.
That's okay. Just give us an image.
Well, if there aren't any other questions
Tell me
about
to-
your
always tell
other
me to hold
wine
the white wine.
program. Oh, one thing I want to say, thank you for asking, Scott. I just alluded a minute ago, there is now a website for this thing called SaturdayWine.com. And Bill Franklin, you can go to SaturdayWine.com and you can order those bottles and they can be shipped, or you can order them and specify that you want to pick them up at the restaurant. So it's $20 to ship them anywhere in California, or those 2 bottles for next week, or you can stipulate that you'd like to have them available for pickup at the restaurant, and we will have them here for you.
Extraneous circumstances, I would be happy to deliver. And I'm always happy
Extraneous.
to see. Yeah.
Anybody is really
yeah.
seriously
No,
sheltering,
there's some
absolutely,
stuff going around.
totally right.
Absolutely.
If you're not leaving your house, Chris will bring the bottles to you
Yeah,
because he's an unbelievable guy.
I'm happy to.
Yep. All right,
I have a closing joke.
Barrett Purdom, tell your closing joke.
All right.
Please do.
It starts with a knock knock. So knock knock.
Who's there?
There, BB.
Hurrah!
What did you say?
Who's there?
Who's there?
Giraffe, fantastic host.
Giraffe Fantasticos!
I don't get it.
Jura district.
Fantastic.
You are.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for coming.
They're trying.
Thank you.
See you soon. See you all soon.
Thank you. Emphasize Jura, though. Emphasize the theme.
More like Jura Mama.
Everyone have a lovely dinner.
Lovely day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Where's Tyler and Emma?